It's 9:30. Good morning. Hope everyone's doing good. I'll ask first, is there any visitors who need to borrow a book? We have a couple extras. Raise your hands if you need one, and I'll bring one to you. Don't see any hands. We're on page 52, lesson 17, Joab's view of David. I think through this book, and I don't know if Mickey would agree or not, the book's called David Through Others' Eyes, and it really almost feels more like a character study of characters in David's and around David's life. But hopefully we're able to kind of use these character studies and consider how they viewed David in those moments and maybe what was going through their head. This morning we're going to be talking about Joab, and we've already been talking about Joab up until this point. I mean, he's been woven throughout the story of David, so there's probably not a lot that's just going to be shockery. No, I'm joking. She's been giving me a hard time about that word. There's nothing that's really going to shock us too much about what we're going to find, but I do think we're going to be able to explore some really complex characteristics of Joab, just in his role, things he did, and even maybe some of his faith. Looking at that, how does that tie into everything? So there's some really interesting information with Joab that I'm excited to get into. Before we really delve into this, let's go to God in a word of prayer, and then we'll move forward. Pray with me, please. Our dear Heavenly Father, we want to thank you so very much for another beautiful day that you've given us to come here and join together with our brothers and sisters and our friends. And we pray that each and every moment that we're able to do this, to open your word and study together, that we can glean off one another, bring up ideas and thoughts that perhaps we hadn't thought about before, to be an encouragement to one another and lift each other up. It's so good to grow in the knowledge of your word, and with so many experiences and so many different studies from so many different folks, it's just a great opportunity to do just that. Pray for all the teachers in the back, especially those who are leading our young children's minds. Thankful for what they do, and we're just thankful for the opportunity to look into your word as a whole. Be with us this morning as we do this study of Joab, and as we consider your man after your own heart, David. Help us to see some things that help us to have hearts like that as well, hearts after your own heart. We thank you for all you do for us. We love you. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. All right. So we are given the announcement of Joab's birth really in 1 Chronicles 2:16, and a lot of our readings actually will come from 2 Samuel, but we have parallels in Chronicles that we can lean off of. So we see this birth of Joab come here, and who is he born to? What is his mother's name? Zeruiah, or however you pronounce that. And Zeruiah is what to David? What is her relationship to David? Sister of David. There are actually 3 sons of Zeruiah that become prominent military leaders, which is kind of interesting. So we have that including Joab, Abishai, and Asahel. And we also talked about what his name meant. Anybody remember what his name means? Yahweh is Father. If you were to kind of look up the breakdown of Joab, or as Michael said, Brother John would call Yoav, because there's no J's. This is the Kentucky version, by the way. We're going to say Joab. So his name means Yahweh is Father, which is also interesting. His relationship to David then becomes nephew to David, and then professionally, what is his relationship with David? Yeah, commander of the mighty men, or commander-in-chief, chief military officer, however you want to say that. Not only that, he's a pretty strong one, pretty good one. We know from his feats in Rabbah that he has some pretty great strategic acumen here. So he's probably a pretty smart guy, known for his tactical expertise. He also likely has a lot of influence and authority with that role, right? So not only is he the king's nephew, he's going to have that view from people on him as this royal figure, so to speak. That and his commanding role. And we also see, as some of the stories we've already presented, things he's asked to do or says to do, they get done. And not only that, a lot of times he makes sure he gets it done himself. He just takes care of it. There's a lot with Joab, though, that as I said in the intro, it becomes a little complex. Because we do see loyalty with Joab, but we also see some conflicts, internal conflicts especially, in the house of David. So we're gonna consider a couple of those as well. And by the way, I'm not like completely ignoring the book here. None of this is introed in the book this way. The book will tie into some of the things I'm saying, but the book, the class book writer really kind of points to the story of Absalom and considers that relationship with Joab and Absalom and then how that affected David. And we'll talk about some of that, but I kind of wanted to look at this from a little bit further back in the intro here. Now, with the internal conflicts, obviously we do have what happened with Absalom, but that's not the only conflict we have. What are some of the conflicts that you can think of that we might have already talking about that would have happened with Joab and some of the house of David, so to speak? You think of any? Okay, he killed Abner. And who was Abner?
He was the
Leader of Saul's army. Okay.
He was with Adonijah.
Adonijah.
He was trying to take over the kingdom.
Yep.
He was kind of sided with him there for a period of time.
Yep, we're going to look at that again as well. It's interesting. There are some thoughts. Of course, we do have a lot of these what I'm going to call in-house murders. Really, these in-house killings. Of course, as we mentioned with Absalom, but it's interesting if you look into this. Some people think that because of his role, and I don't think there's really a book, chapter, and verse to this, but just an interesting thought. His role is really kind of a peak role aside from just being king. His position is a really, really good position. He's got a lot of authority and power and influence, so it would be difficult to give that up, and it would be difficult for that to be risked, and you might do anything you could do to keep your position. So there is actually some thought given to, say, such as Abner being killed, which the Bible tells us he kills Abner. Why? Because Abner killed his brother. We know that for sure. That's definitely mentioned. But Abner was also potentially in this position to take over a role as chief military officer. So there could be some of that jealousy, some of that, I don't want to give up the position, that could have played a part. I'm not saying it did, but it could have. And then later when David tries to make Amasa chief of military, what happens? What does Joab do then? He kills Amasa, right? So it is kind of interesting to think about, all right, well, if I'm feeling like my role is being impeded on or being threatened, I'm going to put this threat out. And who better than a man who is basically David's hatchet man? I mean, this is a guy that's willing to execute anything that David says to execute. But it is interesting that in that position, if we do consider that a pride point for Joab, if we do consider that an issue, he doesn't push that to the king level, does he? He stays in subjection to David through that, at least up until this point, till we get to Adonijah. So we're seeing some interesting roles played by Joab, and I actually have this this section of notes that's called "Loyal Yet Ruthless," where I kind of wrote out just some of the things that were happening there. On the loyalty side, in 2 Samuel 12, 2 Samuel 12, 26. I think this goes down through, well, really it goes down through the end of the chapter. But this is talking about Rabbah, and I want to notice what Joab does here. If you didn't pick up on this before, I'm sure we did, but just in case. Starting in verse 26, now Joab fought against Rabbah and the Ammonites and took the royal city. And Joab sent messengers to David and said, I have fought against Rabbah. Moreover, I have taken the city of waters. Now then gather the rest of the people together and encamp against the city and take it, lest I take the city and it be called by my name. So David gathered all the people together and went to Rabbah and fought against it and took it. And he took the crown of their king from his head. The weight of it was a talent of gold, and in it was a precious stone, and in it was placed on David's head. And he brought out of the spoil of the city a very great amount. And it also says he brought out the people and put them to work. What does Joab do here for David?
It shows to me that he has loyalty to David, but also, doesn't Joab know that David is God's anointed king?
Oh, yes, he does. Yes, he does, and that's a very good point. I kind of started thinking, and I really just want to bounce this off of you guys. Do you think Joab might have known some of the story of David in his youth and what David accomplished, especially with the giant? Maybe especially with the killing of 10,000s compared to Saul's thousands, and how that story panned out. That didn't turn out so. I wonder if he knew some of this. Even if that's part of it or not, we do see this loyalty to the point that Joab recognizes, if I push this anymore, I'm going to get the glory for this. I don't want to get the glory for this. I want to make sure my king gets the glory for this. So if we view it that way, that is a strong sense of loyalty to his king. Any other comments on that one?
There's one loyalty I tend to forget that, he is the guy that sent Uriah out and took care of that situation.
We were getting there. Yes, absolutely. So
He didn't agree with that, though, I don't think.
probably not, but it's the king's orders, right? Go ahead.
There's one other data point that's not in our lesson that goes along with that. Who took the city of David? If you go to 1 Chronicles 11, who was the first person that actually took Jerusalem? Jerusalem was Philistine or Jebusite for years. Joshua, it wasn't until David that was an Israelite city. Who actually took it? Joab.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't the city of Joab. It was the city of David.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, that's interesting. Yep, that's true. All right. Now we also have within the story of Absalom, without really looking at the family ties there necessarily. In that moment, in 2 Samuel 19, 5 through 8, it was actually Joab who talked sense into David, and got him to go out and to welcome the troops. So even though there was this catastrophe, we still have Joab supporting and encouraging his king. You need to be in this position. You need to be present here and seen. So he's still lifting David up even in that moment. When David wanted to take a census of Israel, Joab attempted to talk him out of it. That's in 2 Samuel 24, 1 through 17. Now, we know that David ignored Joab's advice here, and it was definitely costly. I can't help but wonder if, by the end of all this, David's maybe thinking, man, this guy's he's really here to help me. I need to listen more. This is a devoted guy. And then even built within that loyalty was to the point of being willing to take others out. And this ties in perfectly with what Mickey was saying. What we saw with Uriah. Joab executed what David wanted to happen because his king requested it. And his loyalty to the king was above any, I guess, hesitancy to do that gross work there. There might have even been a bit of a risk for Joab. We did talk about this as well, and Kyle brought this up. I mean, Joab kind of put at risk a little bit his strategic acumen, right? Man, I'm really going to have to work this out to make this look legitimate. This is a difficult situation. Which again, if we want to twist that around, it just points back to his ability to lead and then to direct his men into what to say to the king. So there's a lot going on in Joab's head. And interesting that, he's young, probably younger than David for sure. So we got some youth coming in there too. Go ahead. Sorry.
He had loyalty to his fighters too. When they were fighting Absalom, he had to go in and tell David, suck it up. You're the king. Get out there and appreciate the servants that's risked their lives for you.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a good leader.
Yeah, he was an effective leader for sure. Lots of influence, very effective, very smart military man, I think is all, many things we can gather from this. So, let's take that loyalty now. We've talked about some of these loyalty features, and I'm just going to throw this contradiction in there to this. Because there was a time that Joab was disobedient to his king and even betrayed his king. So, this is around 2 Samuel 18 and verse 15. And I wrote a note down. I copied this note. I thought it was well said. It said, though Joab seemed very loyal to David, that didn't mean that he obeyed him all the time. When David's instruction disagreed with his own better judgment, he sometimes considered himself justified in disobeying. And one of the most famous examples in this is in the killing of Absalom, David's son. In 2 Samuel 18:15, it said, and the king ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, deal gently for my sake with the young man Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave orders to all the commanders about Absalom. Now, if we keep that in mind, what's been done here? Number one, we have the king's order. We have the king's request. Please be gentle with him. For whose sake? For my sake. For the king's sake. This being told to Joab directly, okay? Keep all this in mind. Not only this, but the people around would have heard what was being said. People who would know. They knew who Joab was. They knew what Joab's loyalty to the king was. And yet, putting all that aside, we know how this turns out. Even though David clearly made this command in 2 Samuel 18, 9 through 14, and Absalom happened to meet the servants of David. Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak, and he was suspended between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him went on. And a certain man saw it and told Joab, behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. Joab said to the man who told him, what? You saw him? Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? I would have been glad to give you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. But the man said to Joab, even if I felt in my hand the weight of 1,000 pieces of silver, I would not reach out my hand against the king's son. Now, isn't it interesting that this man was putting up more of a fight against Joab than Joab stood so many times for David? I mean, he's really trying to put Joab in his place here. For in our hearing the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, for my sake, protect the young man Absalom. On the other hand, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, by the way, then you yourself would have stood aloof. Joab said, I will not waste time like this with you. And he took 3 javelins in his hand, thrust them into the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak. If you look into that, by the way, because at first reading, you take it, I know I took it kind of hyper literally, and you think, well, how is it that the 10 men that then surrounded him killed him? if he has 3 javelins through his heart? Well, the 3 javelins can be taken as just sharpened sticks, basically, by the way. And the heart can often not be hyper literally taken and just being in the midst, to basically be just stabbed in the midst, and then he would have been finished off by the other men. Nonetheless, we have this striking story of Joab blatantly disobeying the direct command of his king. A question came from this. Whose method of dealing with Absalom was correct? David's gentle method or Joab's swift justice? What would you say?
I'm gonna go with Joab,
Okay, Joab. Why do you say that?
because Absalom was a threat to David.
Okay.
And as Joab told him when he went in to, tell him to get out and address his servants, you love people who hate you and you hate people who love you. He was looking out for the kingdom, I think. Now,
Ye-
whether he was right, well, in God's eyes, God judges, so, but, I can see Joab's point of view here.
Yeah, and I would actually agree with that. I could see his point of view as well, Kyle.
Yeah.
Well, ultimately, it's ultimately the king's job to handle this. And in that regard, Joab more than crosses the line in what David was likely not to put justice before grace in this situation. The problem is that grace, and say this carefully, grace isn't warranted in this situation. Even though we recognize that we are just as wicked as Absalom in what we have done to God, grace isn't warranted in our situation either. It's what makes it so graceful. It's what makes it great.
Yeah.
But justice needed to be done here for the sake of the kingdom, for the sake of the family. Justice needed to take place. And if there was going to be grace offered, it had to be in light of that justice was on the table. And David's reaction on this, I don't think justice ever was on the table.
Yeah.
So, who was right? I think neither of them. Joab very much should have brought him back, and it should have been at the hands of the king giving justice for what had been done. But
Does it change any things if we change the character? If it wasn't Absalom, if it wasn't the son of David, if it was some other commander, does it change our perspective? Just curious.
I think so.
Okay, you think so?
I mean, if you think of it in terms of parenting, it changes the perspective. We've told our kids before, you need to listen to us and respect our authority so you don't grow up and get in trouble with things like the law or teachers David's just take the kingship out of it and just think of it from a parent to a child. If he had dealt properly with his disciplining his children, would it have been different? Would Absalom even have been facing Joab if he had respected David's authority and David had disciplined him as he should have in the first place?
Yep. That's where I think a lot of our class book kind of can tie back in. I hate to call it a special situation, but kind of is a special situation, special circumstances. Any other case, it would have been a no-brainer. Any other case, there would have been rejoicing that this treason or that this rebellion was put to rest, this threat.
But look at the times that David has shown grace to Absalom. There was no remorse from Absalom. He was wanting to take over the kingship.
Mm-hmm.
And so I call that grace that David showed to Absalom. He didn't really deserve it because he never humbled himself and accepted the sins that he had committed.
Okay, Cal?
Just to kind of piggyback off that, and which, when it comes to grace, we never deserve it. But what David was showing him in those moments, I'm not sure is, for lack of a better word, I'm not sure it's best to call it grace, but further away. I think fear in this point of his life really dictates a lot of the direction that he walks down, as opposed to wanting to try and, I want to see this relationship restored. I want to see this relationship, brought to peace. Instead, he really kind of acts out of fear, and then it gets to a point where now justice does have to take place. And I'm not sure David could tell you what a clear picture of grace really looks like at this moment, because
Yeah.
he's become so enthralled in trying to fix a relationship without actually doing the hard things to fix the relationship.
Yeah. Don't envy this situation at all. We have nothing that compares to this really, so that's tough to even think about.
And Luke also wondered if in some ways David, because all this was prophesied, or I don't know what the right word is, Nathan told him this was gonna happen after Bathsheba. I wonder if in some ways he doesn't feel responsible for it. Like this is all a consequence of my mess. And just throw that in the mix of
Yeah.
emotions and thoughts.
I don't know how I couldn't, but I mean, who knows? Maybe so caught up in everything that may be back there. I think just in a parent role too, you always kind of feel a sense of guilt for what's going on with your kids. I mean, you can't control the actions they make at the time. You can only control what the consequences of those actions are if you're still in your home. So there's definitely some things to think about there. What could be going through David's head as well. So yeah, it's just an interesting question to consider. Really neither here nor there, but in this situation, David's obviously trying to do some protecting for whatever end goal. Joab is also kind of in a way trying to do some protecting, but for the end goal of his king. He's wanting to get the threat, if we remove Absalom's name and relationship, this threat. He's trying to take care of this threat. So, but should he have done what the king ordered? Probably so. It's just, that's a lot going on there. And then Mickey mentioned Adonijah. We have betraying the king by Adonijah. In 2 Kings 1, 5 through 7, it says, "Now Adonijah the son of Haggith exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared for himself chariots and horsemen, 50 men to run before him. His father had never at any time displeased him by asking, Why have you done thus and so? He was also a very handsome man. He was born next after Absalom. He conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest. And they followed Adonijah and helped him." So David at this time, had planned to pass the kingdom to who? Solomon. But Adonijah was his second born after Absalom. And Adonijah wanted the kingdom and organizes this plan and confers with who? Joab, who then supports him. Now, we can consider some things with this. Why would Joab have done that, do you think?
Was he next in line?
Okay. The next in line according to who or what?
That's the age of sons.
Okay, age of sons, all right.
How did they?
Why would that be so important to Joab? Why would that be so important? Why would this be so important to Joab? That Adonijah be put in place? Thoughts?
Could be that at this point, he's not very confident in the decisions that David's been making.
Okay.
I mean, the way he handled Absalom and other affairs in his life, and also Solomon is the one that was from Bathsheba that created a lot of his problems. Just at this point, he's thinking he's not making sound decisions.
Yeah, and that could be. I think that's a fair thought. Of course, we're still in kind of some speculation here, but I think that's definitely prevalent and notable.
Is it possible also that, I think we assume Solomon's quite a bit younger than Adonijah, for sure. And I don't know if we know about Joab's age, but they may have been more contemporaries. You know, they may have seen Solomon as a kid. May have been more like his own age and have grown up and known Adonijah better than probably would have Solomon.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a possibility. It's also a possibility that this would help protect his position. Just things to consider with all that. Again, not for sure. But some notes pointed to that this betrayal highlights one of Joab's recurring faults, which is that he often seemed to rely on his own judgment and opinion. And he did what he thought was best regardless of the orders at points. So was this a form of pride? Possibly. Joab certainly was not the king, not the boss, so to say, there. Maybe just over his military men. But again, he was not the king. He was under authority. But we still see, even through all this, that he had some sort of respect for David, right? So we have, again, this loyalty mixed with some of this rebellion. It's all jumbled up here. And then we also have some counsel mixed with conniving acts. I mean, where he causes some of these where Joab causes some of these in-house issues. And then if you want to put the cherry on top, we have what we consider a man who has faith in God as well through all this. You look at 2 Samuel 10. 2 Samuel 10, verses 9 through 14. Note some of the words that Joab uses. When Joab saw that the battle was set against him both in front and in rear, he chose some of the best men of Israel and arrayed them against the Syrians. The rest of his men he put in the charge of Abishai's brother, and he arrayed them against the Ammonites. And he said, "If the Syrians are too strong for me, then you shall help me. But if the Ammonites are too strong for you, then I will come and help you. Be of good courage, and let us be courageous for our people and for the cities of our God, and may the Lord do what seems good to him." So Joab and the people who were with him drew near to the battle against the Syrians, and they fled before him. We'll stop there. What does Joab do in these words when it comes to God?
He says God's in control.
God's in control. So is this a man of faith?
At this point.
At this point, Mickey says, at this point, right? It's interesting to see as we read this. And of course, we read all this about David, and we consider the heart of David and having a heart after God's own heart. And yet, class period after class period after class period, I feel like all we've done is say, "Look at this really bad thing he did." And then we have Joab, who we're seeing these murders. I mean, killing family members, killing or causing this murder scene to take place so that another sin can take place, and yet to maybe even claim to have a faith in God. Or as some might say, well, I'm a Christian. I may, I don't know, gamble, cuss, drink, and go to places I shouldn't go, but I'm a Christian. What would we think of somebody that says something like that? Like, that's not very Christian-like. That doesn't seem like a Christian thing to do. But then we're all willing to say what when it comes to sin? We've all sinned, fallen short of the glory of God. We're all guilty of sin. We're all guilty of doing things we shouldn't do. And at the end of the day, we still come back to God. So, can we have faith in God and still do wrong things? Obviously.
I was going to say, I think we said it in some of the answers. Michael gave you the answer where we first took over Israel there, or Jerusalem. Joab won many battles. I think it would have been very clear that it's many battles he won. I think he probably was well aware that a lot of them were contributed because God was with him. So whether or not how deep his faith grew over the years, I think he understood that God had very much an effect for him being the commander this long and being over here
Yeah, that and what Ron just said ties in so well with kind of what one of my ending questions was, and we may get to it again, but was just considering David through Joab's eyes. With all this in mind, we would have to note that Joab saw what God was doing with David as David served God, how God was carrying David. Which I can't help but wonder is part of that attributing factor to the loyalty he would have shown to David, knowing where he's led us because of our God. So that's, yeah, good point, Ron. Thank you. So with all this in mind, kind of this ebb and flow of some of the things we've pointed at, the loyalty, but the rebellions, the murders, but also the encouragements. How would you view someone like Joab with all that information? What would you say about a man like that? Good man, bad man, both?
Seems like he was loyal.
Okay. At the end of the day, maybe loyalty was a stronger card. Okay.
There was one of the commentaries I read said that David was a man after his own heart, or after God's own heart. Joab was a man after his own heart.
Okay.
He had his.
So some of that pride maybe, and
He had that position in pride, and he didn't want to give up.
Yep.
And he would be loyal when it benefited maybe him.
yeah, I think we see that for sure. So definitely dealing with some pride. It also continues to stand out to me just how strong pride is throughout many of these characters.
You know, that question that Mickey just asked, or that statement Mickey just made, begs the question: is loyalty, when it's beneficial to you, really loyal? We call this man a loyal man. But is he really?
It's a win-win. I can be loyal and get what I want.
Yeah. I mean, would we call a man who says, well, I'll be faithful to my wife as long as there's no other options?
Hmm.
And just because he's not a very good looking man, there are no other options. We say, well, that's a really faithful man. No. No, we wouldn't say that at all. We definitely see a lot of depiction of loyalty in Joab, but we also see that loyalty oftentimes disappears when he thinks something is better. So is it truly loyalty, or is it just appear that way? Whenever when we examine the total of his character, and in that regard, our faithfulness to God, are we faithful people, or does it just appear that way because that's the best option right now? If something comes along that we like better,
Yeah.
we sacrifice that.
Yeah, it's good. And again, we're able to do what we're doing right now because this is laid out in front of us. And I don't think any of our personal accounts might look like we're going around killing family members and causing problems, but there's certainly going to be some things in there that we're not proud of. Things that we wouldn't want others to know about because it's going to change their opinion about us. They're not going to think good things all the time about us. I had this question: if you knew this person in your life, would you want to hang out with them? I'm like, well, no, I wouldn't want to hang out with a guy like that. He's going to stab me in the back. But we're still surrounded by faults. It's temptations, things that carry us away in our individual ways. It's interesting to think about.
I wonder if his loyalty, maybe he was being loyal out of his own self-preservation or self-edification or whatever, or if it was just misguided, like with Absalom. David said, protect my son, and Joab thinks, well, I'm going to be loyal to the king, so I'm going to destroy this man. And to apply it to today, Jesus says, love our enemies, but often we will not do that. We'll argue with our enemies or attack our enemies or whatever, thinking, well, they're in sin, I'm being loyal to God by, confronting this my way versus doing what God asks us to do and deal gently with his image bearers, even when they're our enemies. I think sometimes we can fall victim to that way of thinking, just like Joab did. Like, I'm being loyal to God by going after this sin in this person's life, but we are to go after that sin, but in Jesus' way, not in our own way.
Good point.
Is my memory correct that David ordered
That's part of my downfall notes. Literally the next page, how he died.
So, one thing that stands out to me reading this is Joab's a real person. You know, a lot of times we read other types of books and literature, and we like people to be either completely good or completely bad. I think one point that helps us think about it, the Bible is written to show us how things are, not necessarily what we want to see or the kind of stories we want to read. Because I do like to put people in categories, and this is involved, I think. Was this good? Was this bad? And life is weird and messy, and I think sometimes we are blinded to, especially in our own lives. Like, I want to consider myself to be a good person, but what have I done wrong? And someone else, if they've done something against me, well, obviously that's a bad person. And it's not always as easy to categorize like that.
Yeah.
I think that there's a bigger picture.
Yep. Good. So, to tie in with what Miss Carol just said there, 1 Kings 2, 5 through 6, and also verse 34, says, "Moreover, you also know that what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, how he dealt with the two commanders of the armies of Israel, Abner the son of Ner, and Amasa the son of Jether, whom he killed, avenging in time of peace for blood that had been shed in war, and putting the blood of war on the belt around his waist, and on the sandals on his feet. Act therefore according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace." Verse 34, "Then Benaiah the son of Jehoiada went up and struck Joab down and put him to death, and he was buried in his own house in the wilderness." This was the wish of David. Years of loyalty, but the things that he didn't obey came back to bite him in the end, and David put that to rest. I'm going to try to read some of this. What I thought was an interesting perspective, an interesting note on this. The title of it was called "God Uses Even the Broken." It says, "For the 40 years of David's reign, as well as the years leading up to it, Joab was a loyal lieutenant. I don't believe Joab gets nearly enough credit for David's conquest of the surrounding nations and the establishment of the empire. Without Joab, things might have turned out differently. The relationship between David and Joab was complex. David depended on Joab, even when he felt powerless to completely control him. They grew up together, went into exile together, and together carved out an empire. The golden era of Israel was the reign of David, but standing alongside him was his nephew Joab," which is all valid and true points. David is described as a man after God's own heart, and God used him mightily. Joab's character seems to have fallen short of David's, though. Yet God also used him in establishing the kingdom. God can use all of us, broken as we are, to carry out his purpose in creation and in his kingdom. So I thought that was an interesting note from somebody on Joab. So, again, I know I didn't really dive into the book, but I just felt like there was more to Joab to explore with all that. Any other comments or conclusive thoughts on Joab? He's probably going to come up again.
Maybe it's already been said. My thought about this whole class is, the more we study, the more the comment, David's a man after God's own heart, becomes one of the more complex and difficult. What does that mean?
What does that mean?
Becomes a real, way more complex and challenging thought than I may have originally thought.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know that, honestly, I don't know that I've dug this deep into looking at David. And, I was telling somebody, I just preached a sermon on David, and now I want to go back and be like, that was wrong. I need to correct my words. Like, not a great guy on action side, but if we just look at the heart of who he is. But, yeah, for sure. It's
David part 2.
David part 2. Fooled ya. All right. Anything else before we conclude class on Joab? That was a good discussion, I think.